Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 23rd. I had to double check the 23rd Design Journal. Thanks for joining me tonight. I have lots of cool things to show you guys and to talk about, so I'm looking forward to getting things started. Lots of cool things going on and lots of challenges, right? So that's part of what I'm going to talk about as well, because I promised you guys I would take you along on the entire journey, the good, the bad, the surprising, etc., etc. So let's start out, though, with my usual news. News-wise, I don't have too much to share. Obviously, of course, we're getting ready for a couple of cons, but they're all going to be local. So UConn is coming up. Probably not going to be running games there, but I'm probably going to go. So if you go to UConn, I'm actually going to try playing some games. Come on out to UConn and see me. It'd be very cool to see you there. So come check it out. Also, let's see. Games we're playing right now. So what we're going to be doing in our weekly group is, because I'm spending all this time on Cool Name, I've told the guys that I have to stop running other stuff for now. We're going to do some Cool Name play testing, which we've been doing on a separate time. But the other thing that we've been doing is we've been playing Massive Darkness 2. And so, oh my God, the Massive Darkness 2, my friends backed it on Kickstarter, and we have an infinite number of minis and cards and boards and everything set up. It ties into the zombie side Black Plague. It brings in all the add-ons from the old Massive Darkness. It's absolutely insane. If you've ever played this, it's a board game by Simon. It's just enormous, and it's basically a dungeon exploration game. A lot of fun, a nice filler while they wait for me to get through with this stuff, because I'm the guy who usually runs games for us. Zero the Blade, good evening. You were asking what sort of changes are we talking about tonight? Well, I'll get to that in just a second. I have one other thing. I have mail call. I almost forgot to do it. Mail call this week. Captain's Log from Star Trek Adventures from Odysseus Games. It's basically solo play for the 2D20 Star Trek game. I'm looking forward to it. I love solo play stuff. I think it's a ton of fun. So we'll see how this all turns out here. Once I get to try it out, I'll let you guys know. But for tonight, we have a couple of key things we're going to be doing. One, I'm going to be talking about the playtest document and what's going into it and what you're going to see when we finally get around to releasing it to you. I'm also going to be talking to you a little bit about our recent journey, how things have been going. And finally, I'm going to be showing you some of the new art that we're going to be including in the book. This art's going to be free for people to use, just like everything else. It's going to have the same Creative Commons license, which is kind of where we're leaning to at the moment as the other things, but it should be a ton of fun. One thing that I do want to, well, let's see, I'll come back to that in a minute. Anyway, that's what we're going to do tonight, and I'm kind of going to dive right into it. So, yeah, I had to put off last week's design journal. I have not put out the playtest document yet. It's because I hit some roadblocks that for the life of me, I couldn't get around. And although I can call on consulting designers to do things, I can't really just like call on them and say, can you come fix something tomorrow, right? It takes a little while for me to pull them in. And so some of these things get me blocked, and I'm struggling with them a little bit. Now, what I did do, and this is what I usually do when I end up stuck, is I went back to the Discord server and I just started reading through all of the comments, reminding myself of the cool things that you guys have talked about and the ways that you've managed things. I also pulled down our survey results, looked at those as well, got a lot of good feedback. So what did I get jammed up on this last week? So weirdly, it's not the combat stuff, which we're going to be playing with a little bit. It had more to do with the issue of skills. So it seems pretty straightforward. Cool Name RPG, you add things up and that gives you your action score. But what do you do for skills? Now, one of the options is something we've talked about before. Linora put together a great wheel of skills, something like that. That's a pretty traditional approach. I did what they had done as well, which is I went and started pulling every game book I could think of and cataloging how they manage their skills. So there's a few different ways that people do things. One of the ways, and this is what you see in 5th edition, is a pretty straightforward list of just basic skills. No specializations. You're not really even doing like skill levels. It's just straight up. You have this basic list of skills, and it's very simple and straightforward. A lot of fun, but it does leave out some crunch that people tend to like, right? It also can be a little bit confusing at times because you look at that skill list and you're like, So which one do you use? Am I going to use investigation or perception? I don't really know which one works. And I know you can just call out any one of them and move forward, but it is the sort of problem that comes up in a game, right? So I looked at that. Then you got games like GURPS, right, which has this massive skill list of every skill you could ever possibly know. It's got a web of connections where this one is related to this one, but not to this one. And if you get this one, then this one's cheaper. Very simulationist, very cool and well thought out, but also pretty intimidating at times, right? I remember sitting there really struggling, going like, I don't understand. I took dagger. Does that help me get longsword or not? You know, so that's not really with our goals, not really where we want to go. We want to go something that's a little bit simpler, but that gives people some options and some opportunities. The other thing that struck me, and this is the really interesting thing to me, the other thing that really struck me is that people really, despite the fact that it was a placeholder and only meant to just sort of get us through it, people reacted really, really well to the MOs. They really seemed to like that concept, this idea that you summarize all of your abilities as in a word, so to speak. Now you've seen things like this in like Numenera, where you might have like a clever cipher or something like that, right? Fate has done some things like this. You also see this in games like Earth Dawn, which we've talked about before, where they have the adept, which represents all of the skills and abilities that a character might have packaged up into a single concept. You don't have a separate skill list. You just have all these magical abilities that you earn at each circle instead of level as you go up. So things similar to this have been done before, but no one's really done it quite like this from the things that I've seen. So I sat there and asked myself, should we really be going down the same old skill road that everybody's been down, especially after people seem to have so much fun with this? On top of that, they were building their own MOs. Now, one thing I want to remind folks is that when I talked to Robin Laws and Ken Hite, they did a really good job of highlighting the idea that we need to identify how we're going to create a different gaming experience from other games. If we're just offering the same game experience, and we've talked about this, it's not going to do us much good. In addition, one of the core concepts of this entire project is that other people can build their own stuff. So what sort of a design lends itself to that sort of creative inspiration, right? That gives people the idea. I mean, we saw one example of someone who was playtesting with some kids, and they were like, well, we don't want to play any of those stupid MOs. We want to make up our own. I want to be like a cat biter. And it's like, what is that? I don't know. So look, I'm not saying that I'm suggesting this, that we move away from scores and anything like that and do pure narrative or anything along those lines, because it's fun, but that's not where people want us to go. But what I am saying is that as I started to work on this, I realized that that was one of the elements that, although it was supposed to be temporary, it really seemed to resonate with folks. And so we started asking ourselves, how do we utilize that? How do we leverage that so that we can take the most advantage? And when I started looking at this, I kind of, all of this that I'm telling you now, I'm summarizing it in a few minutes, but this is a lot of effort, time, pouring through books, talking to people, testing things out, trying to figure out the right approach to get this thing done and to make it so that it's not just a copy of whatever we've seen before. And it's fun and it inspires creativity. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be releasing the core rule playtest, similar to what you've seen before. Yep, right. See this here, playtest rules version 0.02 that we're going to be sending out, right? So we're going to be releasing that. However, I'm also going to be releasing a rules module. This rules module is, in a sense, a playtest of the concept that you can swap things in and out at will. In the core rules, we are going to use MOs. I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in a minute. But we're also going to include a rules module that lets you swap that out. And it's going to tell you which pages to pull out and which pages to put in if you're printing them, right? With a more traditional skill tree skill system. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how that's all going to work, and we'll talk through it. So let me go ahead and get started by showing you some of what we've been doing. Now, I showed you this here. Some of this stuff looks exactly the same as what you've seen before. Nothing new here, for the most part. But what we did do is we took a lot of information from all of you on your feedback in the surveys about things where we needed to clean things up. One of the things we did is we split out the terminology, simplified it a little bit. I'm not going to go through here. You're going to get to read it soon enough. In addition, we simplified the way that the core mechanic is described, and we split it out from some of the information that it didn't need to be there. We added the skipping the roll here as opposed to later on in the document. Little things like that here and there to sort of help to simplify this. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that we did settle in on some terminology. One of the terms we're using is action check. You've heard this used in games before. DC superheroes used to use action check. I'm pretty sure the new Marvel game, when I was reading it the other day, I went, oh, look at that, action check. It's not really a new term, but it's a pretty familiar term that people have that helps to sort of identify what it is that you're trying to do. We settled it on score for what things have. They have scores, which is the numerical value associated with it. Went through here and broke some of that out, blocked it out a little bit. Simplified this here to make it a little easier to figure out the core mechanic. Went through and simplified the difficulty score process. Now, one of the things we did, we also went in and gave a little more detail in areas where people were like, yeah, we kind of struggled with that part. We couldn't figure out what to do. So we cleaned that up, put in a section about finding the action score that's a little bit easier to follow and simpler for folks. It also deals with a couple of modifications we made, such as the rule of one, which means that you can never add more than one of a type of thing to your action score. So it doesn't matter if you're holding a great screwdriver or a great hammer and a great chisel, you still only get one tool bonus from that, right? You can't add for both of those things. So we added that in there as well. We also went in and let me pull this back up. We put in some information about mod hunters. Now, this is one of the things we talked about last week, that some people were like, this is so great. We have to come up with our own ideas on how to improve our action score. And everyone got real creative and it was real neat. And other people were like, oh my God, the entire game ground to a halt as Bob over here sat there trying to find every single modifier he could add. So we're going to be asking folks for some ideas on, what you do if you run into that in your game, how you handled it, what worked, what didn't, did anything work, right? So we're going to be looking at that as well. So yeah, that's one of the things here that we dropped in. But now we come to one of the interesting things that I think you guys are going to want to know about, which is primary attributes. So there's a few things that I want to talk about here. So let me switch my sharing to show something different. Here we go. So as before, we've got the three different groups for attributes. The first is physical, right? And in the physical attributes, we have strength, which is obvious, toughness, which again, pretty straightforward what toughness is, right? And finally, we have coordination, okay? So coordination is motor skills, sense of balance, agility, accuracy. It's used for any sort of full body activities like acrobatics, as well as actions that require hand-eye coordination like pickpocketing. If you remember, I did some unnecessary brain research and discovered that, in fact, the same parts of the brain handle both of those type of tasks. So the games that have long used those, to this day, it still, they were right all along. So that's one of the things that we have here. So those are our base physical skills. Now, the next thing that we've got are our mental skills, okay? For mental, we've got intellect, which is logical processing, the ability to identify patterns and general memory, all aspects of intellect, used for deduction, learning complex tasks, and remembering facts. Then we next have creativity. Now, creativity is your ability to assemble all the information you've got in novel ways. The core attribute for artistic creation, for thinking outside of the box, and for finding solutions to problems where the answer lies outside the realm of accepted truths. So creativity is going to be an interesting one to see how people apply it. It'll depend on the type of game you play, how important that is to you. It also, though, can come in when the characters are stumped. I see creativity as being a good one where the characters are like, we just don't know what to do. We're kind of at a dead spot. We don't necessarily just want you to give us a hint. And you can say, well, why don't you make a creativity roll? And that represents the character sort of thinking things through and finding solutions that maybe they weren't able to find themselves in the real game because it's not really happening. We have gaps in our perception, right? So creativity is the next one. And then after creativity comes willpower, which is your ability to resist the influence of others and preserve or persevere in the face of extreme hardship, right? Not necessarily physical hardship, but it could be, right? The GM could say, yeah, your body can't do anymore, but you can force yourself to keep going. So these are opportunities. It's also going to be important for psychic assault, seeing through illusions, that sort of thing, right? All right. So from there, we get into the next set, which we at one point were calling spirit. I've killed that. It was deceptive. It sort of suggested a magical aspect, which isn't there. I've come up with something different. We'll find out if anyone likes it. Instinctive abilities. These are abilities that are just sort of like you do without even trying, right? First, now it doesn't mean you can't focus your will on these, but generally they'll happen. Empathy. So empathy is how much you are in touch with other living creatures, and in some settings, the natural world itself, depending on if it's a living thing, right? It could come into play when you're like trying to bond with animals or get someone or a group of people to trust you, or maybe recognize a person's true intentions or true nature as you're looking at them. That's your empathy or connection with living people and living things. Another one is presence. Now, presence is your force of personality. It's that thing where someone walks into the room and people just notice they're there, right? Stage presence is something sometimes people talk about. This would be used on action checks around performance, intimidation, seduction, leadership. All of these things are going to be part of this. Now, notice we're not using charisma. Charisma is, I think, a bit of a problem word because people then will start thinking of it as being a positive thing only. And a huge monster, a hideous monster, isn't necessarily going to have high charisma, but it certainly have high presence. You're going to notice it, right? So that's where presence comes in. And then the last bit is awareness. And awareness is just your ability to notice key features in your surroundings, your senses. Could be sight, could be sound. I mean, sight, sound, anything, right? Any sort of awareness. It's your ability to find hidden objects, to spot traps, to see through some deceptions, right? And so these are going to be the core attributes. Now, when we originally did the basic playtest, we kept it pretty simple because we wanted to just focus just on that rolling of the dice and finding of the action scores. Now that we've gotten past that, we want to split this out a little bit because it sounds like people really do want a broader set of attributes. Now, most people do. Now, we will be including a rules module that reduces these for folks who just don't want to do all that. But we wanted to have all of these attributes. It seemed that people really wanted to see this, and it was important to people to see this. Now, one of the things that we did a little bit different is previously we only went down to 2 for the scores, I believe. What we're going to have is we're going down to scores under 2. Now, these are primarily going to be NPC attributes, right? So you could have a 1, which would be children or very elderly or injured, things like that. But you could also have a 0. Now, I'm not saying a player couldn't have a 0. Certain player character lineages like fairy might have a 0 strength. Does that mean they have no strength? No. What it means is they don't have enough strength to have an impact on action checks. All right. So there's a difference between saying they don't have any strength, but at the same time, their strength won't help with action checks. Now, their skill that's based on strength might, but as a general rule, their attribute of strength won't. And so this allows us to get quite low on some of these and get down a little bit in terms of what these represent. I'll also come to in a moment a slight change that we're going to make to the action table as well. But for now, that goes down to there. And in fact, I just jumped to the action table. So the difference on the action table that I wanted to talk about is that previously we went down to 2. We're actually going to take it down 2 more levels. So we're going to go down to a 1, which is basically just a solid 1 and a 0, right? Which is 0. These can come into play at certain times. They do matter at certain times. That table matters. There's no dice involved for either of those, or just a flat score. We looked at doing like a D4 for 1, but adding the D4 into the mix just got a little bit messy. Plus, then it doesn't open end, and we just decided that was going the wrong direction with it. So you can actually get down and have some of these scores that are lower, but again, they're for special situations and they're not typically shown on the table, right? So that's the difference there. All right. So, but let me get to the next thing I want to show you. Talking about combat. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not 100% happy with how all this adds up, but I'm going to show you how it works. And we're going to have to, when we test it, see, that's the thing for you guys to keep in mind is that we're doing our best to test some of this ourselves before it goes to you, but we're literally giving this stuff to you almost as fast as we're coming up with it, right? We're letting you test it with us. So let's take a look here. Vitality and wounds. These are two different things. And after giving it a lot of thought, one of the things that we didn't love is when you have a character who has hit points, and your hit points determine if you are alive or dead, unconscious or conscious, right? You go from, say, 10 hit points down to 0 hit points, which means you're effectively dying, which should suggest a pretty horrific wound at this point, right? I mean, that's pretty bad that you're about to die, that they're performing trauma treatments on you and things, right? Trying to bring you back from the dead. That's a pretty ugly place to be as a character. And that isn't really represented well in the standard hit point systems that we generally play with, right? So we're looking at this like going, guys, this doesn't really work great. We don't love it. So how can we do it better? And one of the things that we looked at, and this, again, other games have done similar things. So I'm not like pretending like, wait till you see the amazing thing that we've come up with that no one ever has come up with before. I mean, other people have thought of these things, but here's what we ended up with. We ended up with vitality and wounds. Now, one of the reasons we have both of these things is that if you'll remember, going back to our description of what sort of a game we're creating, it's got sort of this almost pulpy sort of feel to it, right? It's human level. It's not superheroes. But if you notice, say, take Indiana Jones, he gets beat up super bad in scene A, and then by scene B, he's kind of back to normal, right? Probably doesn't have serious wounds. Same thing with John McClane in Die Hard, right? Gets beat up, he suffers a lot, but then by the time we get to the next scene, he's kind of back to normal. Now, occasionally, he takes a wound that sticks with him. And this is something that we also in our surveys and in our planning came up is this is what people want, and this is where we want to go with the game. So we also want to be able to reflect that sort of lingering thing. So, for example, John McClane goes through multiple scenes. It doesn't seem like he's really that tired, but when he gets to the next scene, he's kind of fresh and ready to go and fight again. But when he walks through that glass and his feet are all bleeding, that sticks with him for quite a while, right? That's a wound. And that's the difference between vitality and wounds. Vitality is in the moment damage that you take. It's just the being winded, it's the knockout blow, it's the, all of those sorts of things that when you get to 0, you're out cold, you're not dead or dying, you're just knocked out. That's what vitality represents. It comes back fairly easily from resting or from simple first aid or simple spell magic. You can bring a person right back up, and it doesn't really represent a serious injury. It's the sort of thing you'll walk it off, right? Heroes walk it off all the time. You walk off vitality damage. In fact, I feel like we need to use that somewhere in the rules, the walk it off rule. Now, wounds. So let me show you really quick here. Wounds are things that linger around, and they have to be healed. Now, there's 2 ways that you can deal with a wound. The first is they do have game effects, so negative game effects. But to those who fear the death spiral of wounds that you can't get rid of, you can treat a wound so you don't have the negative effects for the rest of the scene, right? You can treat it so you're not dealing with those effects. But at some point, you have to do some serious wound care to take care of this wound. So this is what it looks like. Basically, vitality is your strength plus your toughness plus your coordination. And your wound threshold is your toughness. And so let's see what this looks like as an example. I've got 3, 2, and 2. So I got a vitality of 6 and a wound threshold of 2. So there we go. We've got our character. The thing to keep in mind is that even in combat, you could have ways to get vitality back, right? There could be ways you could get pumped back up or maybe take a rest and get 1 point of vitality or your wound threshold and vitality back just by spending a round resting, right? Now, the wounds. The reason there's a wound threshold doesn't mean that your wound is going to have that much worse of an effect or things like that. Although I'm sure that people will have wound tables with all sorts of horrific things on them because we love that sort of thing. But For each time your wound threshold is surpassed when you take damage, it adds 1 to the score of the wound. So that's going to end up being applied to the difficulty score of healing that wound later. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing. This vitality looks way too low, and I don't think it's going to work. So we're experimenting with a couple of things before we put this out to all of you. I'm not thrilled with that. We're going to have to come up with something different. But that's how the wound threshold works, and that's the concept behind it. So again, the idea is that the wound is still the same. It's just a matter of how hard it is to heal it, right? No, that math is wrong, and you're absolutely right, Zero the Blade. My math is wrong. It should be a 7 vitality and not a 6. So sorry about that. Yeah, we'll pretend like I know how to do math since it's kind of important to this whole project. Sorry about that. Thank you. Either way, I still think it might be kind of low. I mean, I kind of hate to do stuff like a random ×2 or something for this, but maybe that's where we'll end up. We'll have to see. But that's how vitality in wounds works. Note that this allows for mental vitality in wounds and instinctive vitality in wounds. So wounds to those other areas as well. So basically a wound to your mind, like if you take a concussion, right, in mental, or wounds to your spirit, if you're just getting really worn down by everything that's happening, where you're just like, you don't know how you're going to keep going, right, to your instinctive traits. So yeah, that's the concept here. We're going to focus for now just on physical, but that is built in so that we can do that in other areas. Because if you remember, one of the things we want a game where you can have really cool, where you can have really cool scenes that aren't combat. And so to do that, you need to have some stats that matter for other areas. And this is part of how we can do that. So that's some of the basics there. Let me go ahead and put this away for a minute. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about skills. So now we talked about this already, but I'm going to give you a little skill demo. So looking at MOs, this is how this works. So you are going to get an MO, right? And let's say I'm going to take warrior and I'm going to put 1 point into it. So I got 1 point in warrior. That means anything that theoretically a warrior might do. By the way, sorry for my little white lines there. It kind of bugs me. I see those there. Didn't get my animation right, but close enough. You've got a warrior ability and you apply 1 to it. So now your score in warrior is 1. Like in the earlier playtest, the idea is that as players, you and the GM will have a conversation about certain action checks where you say warrior should apply. So for example, heraldry. It's sort of an educational, learned academic ability, but really, shouldn't a warrior be pretty good at identifying heraldry? I mean, they need to know who to kill on the battlefield, right? So if they see some sort of heraldry they're not sure they know, the GM wants them to make a roll, warrior would be an appropriate ability to roll for, right? So warrior 1. Now, this person though goes, look, I love this warrior thing, but I really want to be like awesome at melee. That's like my shtick. Says, all right, well, maybe you want to get a focus. And so they get melee and they add 2 points to their melee. Now note this isn't this 1 plus these 2. If I'm adding up my action score, I'm going to add up my coordination plus my warrior plus my melee. I'm going to add them all up. We did this on purpose because we never want that weird confusion of like, is this one included or is it not included? Or do I add this one but not that one, as we go along? Now, we do have a limit in here where you can never have a score that's more than 1 higher than the score before it. So there is a limit at some point. Now, a focus is cheaper to add than an MO. It's a little bit easier to add, not so much trouble. You can add it in. Now, this character goes, and then here's the thing, I'm a knight. So longsword is my thing. I can use, I'm all right. I'll have a 3 when I'm using like a mace or something, right? Added to my coordination. But I really want to be a longsword guy. He says, all right, well, you take long blades, add 1 point there. So now you'll have your coordination plus these 3 numbers. And that's your longsword. You might also say, I want to be like really cool at ranged weapons, right? And down the road, when we start talking about stunts and we're ready to play that, maybe you learn a stunt sword throw where you're like, dude, my guy's thing is he always throws his sword at the enemy and stabs him with it right from a distance. And I've done that like 3 times now. I want to add it as a stunt. That's like one of my tricks that I can do, right, without extra difficulty. And the GM agrees, and you can add that in. Again, this is inspired by the old Marvel Superheroes phase rip system. Now, what does this look like on a character sheet? And we are going to include a character sheet with this one. It's not going to be pretty, but it's going to do the trick. It's going to get things done. But if you'll notice, you have your primary attribute, your MO, your focus, your specialization, and your total action score, 7, D6 plus D8. Because most of the time, it's just going to, assuming I did my math right this time, I think I did. Most of the time, you're going to be rolling the same dice. We had a number of our playtesters say that's exactly what happened with them. If you do need to change it, it's pretty easy to look at this and say, but I got 2 + 1 modifiers, so now I'm at 9. So I just look at my action at my table, right? And I know that it's going to be D6 plus D10. Or after you played it a little bit like I have now, you just know from D6 plus D12. So you know it just from memory because it goes up sequentially, right? So that's what the MO approach is going to look like. The idea here is that it doesn't matter what other skills you have here. We're going to give suggestions of a direction you could go. We love the idea that people could build their own MOs. You could build like a, now you could take 2 MOs and be like a warrior thief. What's that? That's Conan, right? Warrior thief. He climbs the wall, steals the stuff, you know, probably have barbarian or survivalist thrown in there as well as an MO. So you could have multiple MOs to sort of build out the sort of character you want with these sort of different sets of skills and abilities. But you don't have to worry too much about the precision of a classic skill tree, right? And so that's why we like this. We like it because when we've shown this and played this with some folks who haven't played a lot of games, they grok this a lot better. They look and they're like going, yeah, I just want to be like a warrior wizard, right? A warrior who can cast spells. It's like, all right, you take warrior MO, you take wizard MO. Which one do you want to be better at? Warrior. All right, so that's warrior 2, wizard 1. You're good to go, man. And you can say, well, I really want to like be like a archer warrior though. It's like, all right, well, and we'll add a focus of range to that, right? Again, very simple, very straightforward, makes sense, deals with sort of logical progression. Now, this isn't going to work for everybody. There are a lot of folks who really, you know, can't play that sort of game. They don't want to play that sort of game, right? They want to be able to say, look, just give me the full skill list. Well, don't worry. We can do that too. Here's an example of combat broken out. Combat breaks out into the 5 key skill focuses, and then you could break it out into 4 specializations, and then you can have certain stunts that apply. These would be preset. This is what the module for a classic skill system is going to have. It's going to have these preset skill sets. If you remember our magical wheel, you know, kind of like that. I don't know if that's the next thing. It is, in fact. See the wheel, something along these lines. It won't necessarily look like this. We don't know how we're going to display it yet, but that's the idea. It will all be preset like in a traditional skill-based system. But we will also, at least for now, look at how this works in the core system as a way to give people the creative freedom to build what they want and to come up with their own ideas and share those online, because we think that's an important part of this whole project and being successful. So this is coming. We're working on it. It's a lot of stuff, and I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be very cool, and it's been a lot of fun so far. I got some great feedback, and like I said, I pulled tons of this from the feedback you guys already gave us, so it should be going well. We are going to be pushing this out to some of our consulting designers as soon as we have this as well. So we'll be hearing what they have to say and how they can help us to improve this while you guys are off playtesting and having your adventures. So last thing tonight that I promised I'd show you art. As you know, we opened up for late pledges, and in those late pledges, we have an opportunity for people to pledge on the Kickstarter. And what do we do with that money? We decided to use it for improving the overall product, and one of the ways we want to improve it is with art. And this art, like everything else that we're making, will be free for everyone to use. Okay, this is not going to be something that's going to be specific to our book, to the masterwork book or anything like that. It's everyone will be able to use this. So here's the first one. Let's see, make sure I have them in the right order for you. I do. All right. So first we have a cleric, because you remember the core book is going to be black and white. So it is the masterwork will be in color, but the core book is black and white. So this is our cleric, just, good old fashioned magical mace, looking awesome, ready to fight, warrior cleric. Then we've got a fighter. I really love that she has a rune worked mechanical arm, right? I think it's like super cool. Very cool character. And then we've got a classic thief rogue, right? I would say that this is definitely going to be like MO thief warrior, right? And that's kind of what you get for an assassin, or maybe thief warrior athlete. So you can have all sorts of weird acrobatics and things as well. But yeah, this guy just looks incredibly cool. And then, of course, we have our wizard, who just looks terrifying. This guy is going to mess somebody up with his magic. But yes, these are the first look at some of the art that we're putting together for you guys. I hope you guys like it. I think it's going to be very awesome. And like I said, it's going to come with the same rights as everything else. So if you're making your own book, you'll be able to have some incredible art to start with as you're putting your stuff together with this. So that should be very cool. Folks, that's it. I've gone a little longer than half an hour tonight because we had a lot to cover. But yeah, and the last thing I was going to say is that there are times where, I've talked about this before. This is a big project, and this is very hard. I'm not going to lie. This is really tough. This is the toughest thing I've ever done in terms of game design and game writing. But I also the most rewarding, and it's probably the thing I don't know, I might be the most excited I've been about a gaming project, because what's coming together and what we're seeing is sort of surpassing our expectations. And we think that even the folks who, if this isn't their style of game, and even if we can't offer modules that make it, more their flavor, I think they're still going to be really proud of the outcome and proud to be part of this. And that's what we want to do more than anything else. Make sure you guys are proud to have been part of this process. More to come. We're going to be finally bringing our consulting designers back, right? Bringing them all back. I still have a plan to bring on the guys who did that incredibly cool research project, academic research project about game rule systems. So they're coming as well. And we're going to do some actual play. Really and truly going to do some actual play for you guys. Working on that as well. But we're getting there, guys. We're getting there, folks. It's going to get there eventually. In the meantime, keep talking to us on Discord. Talk to us on Facebook. DM me. Let me know how you're doing and what's going on and what ideas you have, and we'll take it from there. So thanks, everybody, for watching. Hope you all have a great night and a great weekend. Good gaming.